Coming up on the show, the fall postseason is upon us. Find out which teams on campus will be participating and which teams won't. And later, I sit down with Ryan McDonough from WSBU and the Sports Information Department. Together, we will preview the fast-approaching basketball season. This is Bona Sports Weekly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7th edition of the show. There's a lot to get to today, so let's get started. The women's rugby team beat Plattsburgh in a blowout at home last weekend. The final score was 34-7, and the game was the semifinals for the state playoffs. That means that on Saturday, the Bonnies will take on the University of Rochester for the state title. The game was originally supposed to be played in Albany, but has been moved to Buffalo State to cut down on travel time and expenses for both of the Western New York teams. Saturday will be the second time these two teams will meet this season. Last time the Bonnies beat U of R in Rochester by a score of 29-10 to clinch the Rugby West title. The game will start at 11 a.m. The cross-country teams are headed to New York City to compete in the Atlantic 10 Championship this Saturday. Junior Carrie Carr has had the best season of her collegiate career so far and will hope to lead the women's team to victory this weekend. She has won A10 honors 4 times this year and will be an important part of the 5K race beginning at 10 a.m. Last season, she finished 13th overall at the A10s. At 10:45, the men's 8K race will start. The men will look to their 6 senior members of the team to lead the way, including Harley Thompson, whose top finish came at the Little 3 Invitational when he placed 11th overall. Thompson currently has the 5th fastest 8K record in school history with a time of 26 minutes and 57 seconds. At a time when the men's soccer team needed goals the most, the Bonnies unfortunately failed to deliver. Back-to-back 1-0 losses to George Washington and VCU put the team in last place in the conference, but that doesn't mean the season is over. Bonaventure will need to win all 3 of their last games if they hope to make the postseason. They will also need Fordham and Duquesne to lose to free up the last 2 playoff spots. On Friday, they travel to LaSalle, whose record sits at 5-7-2. Then the Bonnies will be back at home on Sunday to play 6-4 and 5 St. Joseph on Senior Day. Both of those teams are also hoping to sneak into the A10 tournament. It'll be a huge test for the men who are currently riding a 7-game losing streak and have only scored 5 goals in their 13 games this year. It's been 6 years since the women's soccer team missed the A10 tournament. Last year they had to win out in order to clinch, and this year they're probably going to have to do the same as they play their final 2 games of the season. The Bonnies currently sit in 12th place in the A10 standings and have a 2-4 conference record. On Friday, they'll take on Fordham, whose record is 7-9-1. Then on Sunday, they'll take on one of the best teams in the conference when they host LaSalle, who have yet to be beaten in A10 play. The women will be feeding off the momentum of their previous win against a tough Rhode Island team. Junior Lauren Hill will certainly be the target of her teammates when they pass the ball. She has 4 goals this season, which is tied for a team best with Danielle Viss. All right, so I'm going to do a little something different today. Normally at this point I'd be sitting down with one of our athletes here at Bonaventure, but with basketball season right around the corner, I decided to do a special sort of show this week. I'm honored to be joined by a good friend of mine, Ryan McDonough. Ryan is the co-director of the sports department at 88.3 FM The Buzz and a member of the sports information department here on campus. He's going to help us with our 2014 Bonaventure basketball preview. Ryan, thanks so much for coming on the show today, bud.
Oh, thanks for having me. You know how much I love to talk about our Bonnies.
Absolutely, and I'm very excited to have you on. I know you know a lot about both of these teams, obviously working in the sports information department, so I thought this would be a good week, maybe just with basketball season literally about a week away now. It's a good time to maybe preview both teams.
Yeah, it's coming up, Zach. We got the exhibition games next week. It's coming, and I think everyone here on campus is pretty excited about it.
And if I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion for myself on my own show, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm doing color for the women's game against Mansfield.
That's exciting.
I'm excited. So we'll go ahead and start with the women's team. They had a pretty stellar season last year. They finished with a 24-11 record, an 11-5 Atlantic 10 record, which was good enough to put them at number 4 in the conference standings. And then that gave them a 2 seed and a first-round bye in the Atlantic 10 Championship Tournament in Richmond, Virginia. Team was able to beat LaSalle in the second round by a score of 54-42. But the semifinal game against Fordham was a shock to pretty much everyone who watched the team play last year. At halftime, the Bonnies were trailing by a score of 38-4 and were in danger of setting an NCAA low total of points scored. They managed to avoid that infamous record, but all the same, they were eliminated by a score of 73-32. Hannah Little finished the game 0 for 11, and Katie Healy didn't make out much better, shooting just 4 for 11. Ryan, you and I went down to broadcast the game for the Buzz, the whole tournament, I should say. What happened in that game against Fordham, a team that they'd already beaten earlier that season?
Yeah, well, the thing was that the Bonnies didn't lose at home last year. They did. They lost one game to Toledo, but that was when the students weren't here. They didn't have any sort of home support from the Bonaventure students themselves. So here they are in Richmond. They're coming off a big win against LaSalle, and a game like this is just something that happens in sports where nothing seems to go right. It's not that the Bonnies were short of shot attempts. They shot the ball 54 times. Mm-hmm. They had plenty of opportunities. It just seemed that nothing they could do. They couldn't put the ball in the basket. Time after time, we were broadcasting. We're like, the Bonnies, they're shooting the ball. They're getting plenty of opportunities and good looks at the hoop. It's just not going in. The layup's not going in. Free throws not going in. For a time, Hannah Little, who's a breakout scorer on the team, sometimes can go off for 20 points. Went 0 for 11 in the game. If she can get half of those to fall, we're looking at a different game. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If she can get 12 points out of those 11 attempts, it's a different game. And Katie Healy. 4 for 11 usually is average over 20 points last year. It just did not happen for the Bonnies. It just was something we hadn't seen all year from this team, and really it was a shocker. And nothing just could go right for them, and they were unfortunately, and I think they were prematurely eliminated from the tournament.
Yeah, and when Jim Crowley had his press conference after that game, he did bring up that the team. He said he didn't want to make excuses, but the team was pretty drained. Obviously, that was a very sad week for everyone here at Bonaventure with the passing of Assistant Sports Information Director Brian Moretti, who worked very close with the team. So, it kind of goes back to what Jim Crowley said. You don't want to make excuses, but that could have played a factor that the team was very, very drained.
Oh, absolutely. There's no denying the fact that had something to do with it. They came out against LaSalle inspired. They were they were just the same team that we had seen all along, and it looked to us as broadcasters that this was in the making of being something special. They were going to channel this emotion, and I think that maybe being in Richmond, Brian passed away just a day before their first game while he was in Richmond with the team. That's something that no one expected to happen. It was just a huge shock, and it was something that I am very impressed that the girls even took the court against LaSalle, to be honest. This is one of their closest friends throughout the year. Brian traveled with the team, was very close with the team, and especially Coach Crowley, and it was really impressive, a show of emotion and love for the game that the girls showed by taking the court. And everyone expected our girls to maybe play a little bit better against Fordham, but I don't think anyone can totally blame them for their performance, even though they weren't just completely shot. They did have great looks at the hoop, it just didn't happen for them.
Yeah, kind of what you said. It seemed they played inspired against LaSalle, and it seemed like maybe that took a lot of energy out of them, and maybe just not ready for that Fordham game. It is worth noting, however, that Fordham did go on to win that tournament. So, at least they didn't lose to someone who ended up losing in the later round.
Fordham, yeah, and you can't take away you can't take anything away from Fordham. They played a great game. They played great defense.
It's a fantastic team.
Yeah, they were the better team in the game, and they won the tournament.
So the good news was the season wasn't over after that loss. Bonnies were selected to the Women's National Invitational Tournament, better known as the WNIT. Team was able to beat Charlotte handily by a score of 81-62 at home. Round 2 would be the last game of the season, however, as the Bonnies end up falling to Bowling Green by a score of 76-65. That game was at Bowling Green, and that would effectively end the season for the Bonnies. But that's in the past. Let's go ahead and look at the future. the women have been picked fourth in the A-10, trailing only St. Joe's, George Washington, and Dayton, who, by the way, was unanimously chosen as the best team in the conference by the 14 head coaches. Based on what we've seen last year and what we're expecting this year, do you think this is a fair placement for the Bonnies?
Well, obviously, people were a little shocked to see the team that finished second in the A-10 to be finished fourth in the A-10, especially since most of the starting four out of the five starters are returning. The only starter not returning is grad student Chelsea Boker, and she's replaced by she's replaced by Ashley Zahn, who redshirted last year and was a grad student. It's a grad student this year. So it almost looks like the Bonnies haven't lost anything, but have gained everything. Mm-hmm. They gain a full year of experience from everyone on their starting rotation, including the sixth woman of the year, Hannah Little, and they also gain a great recruiting class. They brought in Miss Basketball New York, Mariah Ruff, who was the first player in Bonaventure history to win that award and to play for the team since Tyler Ralph, who came in as a transfer. And they have their recruiting didn't stop there. They have Miranda Drummond, who came in, who was the one of the runners-up to Mariah for the Miss Basketball New York. So they've got a great set of recruits coming in, and so the fourth looks a little low for the team. Everyone would think, 2 or 3, but Jim Crowley can't be. Jim Crowley is the one that's not upset about that. He wants his team to. He knows he has a special team this year. He wants his girls to be playing sort of as an underdog, to know that they have a target on their back, and to somewhat, play with some more of a, hey, we've got a lot. We're lower than we should be. We want to win these games. We're going to show who Bonaventure's made of, and
So this is a good opportunity for the Bonnies, being ranked fourth, which I think everybody kind of agrees with is pretty low. Some other big news this preseason for the women's team is that Katie Healy has been named preseason first team. Healy averaged 16.5 points and 7.8 rebounds last year. And we've been saying since she was a freshman, Ryan, that Katie Healy is going to be one of the most important players on this team. Well, it's her junior year now. What's she going to bring to the table for this Bonnies team? What's she going to do to help them win? Well,
it's going to be tough for her to do anything more than she did last year, and last year she was everything this team needed. She had an average point total of 16.5 points a game, and she averaged over 20 points at home. She was made first team A-10, which is she as a sophomore. She did this all as a sophomore. I don't think the Bonnies can ask for anything more from her this year, because last year she was stellar. And if Katie Healy is everything she was last year, given the supporting cast around her this year, I think the Bonnies have just as good of a shot as they did last year, which was one of the best shots in the nation, coming in as number 2 in the A-10.
Every year we've been saying Katie Healy's going to get better. She's going to get better. Is this finally the year where I guess maybe she's already kind of stuck out as the star on this team? Obviously, she typically leads the team in scoring. But do you think she gets even better this year?
Well, I don't know if we can call her the star on the team, just given how good the other players are and how deep their bench is this year. I think Katie Healy definitely is their go-to for any sort of scoring late in the game. We saw that last year. A couple home games, they were down. The team didn't play too well for the first 20, 25 minutes of the game, and then Katie Healy was the one who had the ball in her hands at the end of the game, and she's just unreal under the basket. She has so many moves, and she can use her height and length to get around any defender and grab a rebound on defense and then turn around and score the ball herself. So she's definitely their go-to late in the game. And I would agree with you. I would say this is Katie Healy's year to solidify herself as a star on the team. Maybe not the star, just given how
deep the team is. So coming back this season, you brought it up a little earlier, grad student Ashley Zahn, who redshirted earlier in her career, she's going to be coming back at shooting guard. Last year, a lot of leadership seemed to come from grad student Chelsea Boker, and that's because Chelsea was the oldest person on the team. This is a great team, there's no doubt about it, but it's still young. There's no other members on the team older than a junior besides Ashley Zahn. How important is it for her to bring leadership and experience to this team, even though they've already accomplished quite a bit?
Well, Zahn is continuing on an important tradition for this year's Bonnies, and that is she's the last remaining player who played on that year that they went to the Sweet 16. Mm-hmm. She's the last reminder on this team, besides Crowley. She's the last reminder that this school, this squad, under this head coach, can do something really special. And Ashley has these memories. She can pass those on to the younger players like Healy and Little and Gabby Richmond and these players that can really take this team to the next level. I think Ashley is a great addition to this team. I think that her leadership is something that she's going to continue what Boker had last year. She's going to be a threat from deep, as well as the leadership inside the clubhouse, or inside the locker room. I'm sorry, this isn't baseball.
Not baseball. World Series ended yesterday.
And I think that it almost looks like the turnover from this year to last year is the Bonnies are gaining much more than they lost, just because, nothing against what Chelsea Boker did last year, but I think Ashley Zahn is going to step in and be what Chelsea was last year and just, and do a great job and be that threat from deep and have the leadership experience.
So let's, real quick before we move on, let's look ahead. Where do we see this team in March? Do we see them making another WNIT run? Are they A10 champs? Are they even making another NCAA run?
Well, Jim Crowley knows that this is a special team, but he also is very aware that this team is a young team. So what he's done is he's made most of their schedule on the road. There's even amounts of home and road games during the A10 conference games, but the Bonnies are only going to play 4 home non-conference games. So they're going to have an even amount of home games during the conference season, but during the non-conference season they're going to be on the road for most of it, and that's because he wants his girls to learn how to win on the road. That's because he knows that this is a special team of girls that can possibly do something very special, like a top 25 contender possibly next season. So if they can solidify that goal for this year, they can become great next year. But that's not taking anything away from this season. If this team can actually win on the road, we can look at a potential top 25 team. Just given how we're returning most of our players, everyone except Boker, and then we're adding Zahn, and we're adding a great group of freshmen. I think this team can definitely be I think that they can be a tournament team this year and next year. I think next year is the big year for this squad, but this year is also going to. Last year they could have been a top 25 team. They could have been a tournament team, given the circumstances. But they weren't, and that's not taking away anything from what they did. A team of sophomores. So I think we can look at a top 25 team. Maybe a top 25 team this year, and possibly a tournament team with an at-large bid.
Okay. So now let's move on to the men's team. Men finished 9th last season in the conference with a record of 18-15 overall. That's a winning season, but when you look at the games that count, the A10 games, the Bonnies finished 6-10. Now, what happened to this team last year when it came to the conference games? Why can't they seem to pull it together when the games start to count?
You're right, Zach, and it's tough. And you can look at their home record in the conference game. They were only 4-4 at home. And one thing that it's tough to give one reason why a team doesn't win games. But for this year, they simply weren't a second half team. In order to win a game, they'd have to put a team away in the first half, which they did against teams like Fordham and Richmond that they did beat. But they were, in a lot of their games, they would hit the 7 or 8 minute mark, and they would just somewhat fall apart. We saw it against Dayton. We saw it against Rhode Island. Rhode Island was a big loss. It was at home at home during the game that they retired Andrew Nicholson's jersey. So the place was packed, and the Bonnies should have come out just totally inspired for this game in front of Andrew, but they ended up, losing in the 8 minute mark.
Yeah.
And that was Rhode Island's second conference win of the season.
Yeah. And, that's one thing that Coach Schmidt has brought up before is that he wants students to come out for the game to put up, to make it a hospitable crowd, or hostile crowd, I should say.
Unhospitable crowd for the opponent.
But, when the crowd show up and you still can't win, what more can students do?
Well, on the flip side, we did have games like the LaSalle game, which we weren't favored to win that game at all, but the students came out and were in full force, a midweek game, and we did end up beating LaSalle, and then that UMass game.
Yeah. And by the way, I forgot to mention this, the Bonnies made a pretty good run in the A10 conference of that big last-minute buzzer beater, or last-second buzzer beater to beat St. Louis was probably the highlight of the entire season. They lost the game after that, but so that's where Bonaventure kind of landed last season. Let's talk about preseason. Been a big one for sophomore Dion Wright. Sports Illustrated listed him as 22nd on a list of 50 breakout players of the year. Ryan, what do you think makes Dion Wright a breakout player?
Well, Dion's what the reason why they picked him was because of his efficiency. He played 21 minutes a game, but he would score around 8 points, and he'd grab he'd grab about 4 or 5 rebounds a game, and that's only limited minutes. So Dion's a very efficient player, and the highlight of his efficiency, why he's going to be a breakout player, is his shot percentage. He shot 50% last year, which is the team best, and he when he's around the rim, he seems to just everything he touches goes in the net. When he gets the ball kind of in the key, the high post, he'll find a way to score, or he'll find a way to dish it off to someone who could put it in the net. But Dion's going to be in a different role this year. He's looking like he's going to start this season, and that's not something that he did last year. With Marquise Simmons playing ahead of him at the 4 position. But we're going to see if Dion did this great work off the bench. We'll see if anything changes this year when he's put into a starting role.
Yeah, and Luke Wynn wrote, Wright was the Bonnie's most efficient player last season. He finishes well around the rim, makes his free throws, and rarely turns the ball over. So that was Sports Illustrated's reasoning for listing him as 22nd on the list of 50. We know about 4 of the starting 5 this season. Endoy, Wright, Cumberbatch. Gathers will probably start. We don't know if he'll be in the 1 or 2 spot. Who do you think ends up making this last spot on the starting 5?
Well, it's going to be a newcomer, and that's something that's going to be that's a little different from the regular Mark Schmidt grain. Mark Schmidt's usually not high on playing freshmen with big minutes, although last year Denzel Gregg did see a decent amount of time on the floor. But it'll be a newcomer, and that's something that
If you had to pick one newcomer to take that position, who do you think?
I'm going to say it's Marcus Posley. Marcus Posley's he's a junior college transfer player. He played his freshman year at Ball State, which means he has Division I experience. So I think it'll be Posley. And judging from what I haven't seen a whole lot of practice from these, a whole lot of men's basketball practices, but I did see the fan jam, and Marcus Posley made a three-pointer during the scrimmage from about half court. So I think that he's someone that could also take over the game, which is someone that the Bonnies didn't have last year. They didn't have someone that could possibly come in and score 30. Like last year they had a Mosley a couple of years ago, but this year Posley could be that guy.
Okay, so Bonnies are not getting the kind of love that the women's team is getting. They've been picked to finish 10th in the preseason polls. What do you think? Too high? Too low? Just right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's only so much you can judge from a preseason, and then looking at it, if you're a coach, another coach in the A10 or a media member, you got to look and see the Bonnies have a ton of question marks. They don't have a starting point guard yet. They don't know who the starting point guard is going to be, or they at least haven't released it. But it may be a new player, and that's something that is a little questionable if you're another coach or a media member, because a point guard is almost the quarterback of the court. There's someone that has the ball in their hands all the time, and a bad point guard could break your team, but a great point guard can make your team. So if they don't know who the point guard is going to be, they're going to pick the Bonnies to finish a little lower. But the Bonnies definitely do have a lot of pluses to their team, a lot of rocks in their roster. That we saw Endoy, who ended up playing just terrific in the conference tournament, and
So who do you think? Is this is kind of a tough question to ask, but who do you think is the most important player on this team?
I think it's going to be Endoy. I think every single year since his freshman year, everyone's had very high expectations for him because there aren't a whole lot of 7-footers in Division I college basketball. And the Bonnies are blessed to have one in Endoy because his shot blocking ability changes the game completely. He protects the rim in a way that most schools can't. So Endoy, every year, people have expected him to be a great standout 7-footer, and he hasn't met everyone's expectations every year, but we did see glimpses of Endoy's greatness last year in the tournament.
So do you think this is the year that Endoy finally breaks out of that shell?
I think it is, and I think, this Endoy's story isn't a secret. You know, he just started playing basketball only years before coming to Bonaventure, so some of his footwork and his catching ability just isn't there. But he does have the size to be a top shot blocker in the conference, and he's got the size to be a great scorer because it's very tough to guard a 7-footer. So, and last year during the A10 championship tournament, we heard a lot of chirping from the broadcasters that Endoy might be a possible NBA player.
We've heard that before, yeah.
So if he can play the same way he did in the tournament, I think UC will be the most important player for this team, and they need him to be.
Okay, so last question. Same question I asked you about the women's team. Come March, where are we going to see this team? I
think this team will improve postseason. I think they'll have a good. I think they'll have a better season than they did last year. I think hopefully they'll end up in the NIT. They haven't played in a postseason tournament since they went to the tournament back in 2012. So they haven't played in any sort of postseason game. I think they'll make it to the NIT this year. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, I think they'll finish around the top, maybe around the top, the top 6 or 7 in the conference, and that can get some looks for the NIT. I think they have very winnable games in their non-conference schedule. I think they're leagues above the other Big 4 teams.
Yep.
So hopefully they can win those, and they play teams like Dartmouth. Their lone test is going to be at Pitt on December 13th.
Those non-conference games you mentioned, Pitt, the Big 4s are going to be big, but what's going to really be important is those conference games. In the conference, that's continually starting to turn out more and more NCAA tournament participants.
You're right, and I'm looking at the schedule now. They played Dayton twice, which they hadn't done in past years. Dayton obviously went to the Elite Eight last year. They play UMass twice. They do have VCU at home, which will be an interesting matchup because the Bonnies haven't seen VCU at home since 2013. So, that'll be a game the students are going to come out for. Maybe they can get a win against VCU at home when the students are in full force, but the games that are going to be on the road against Dayton, against St. Joe's, against George Washington, those are going to be tough games.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that just about does it. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show today, talking basketball with me. It was a real pleasure.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. Ryan McDonough, co-sports director for the Buzz and member of the Sports Information Department here at St. Bonaventure University. That's it for the show. Tune in next week for more Bonaventure sports. Until then, I'm Zach Warren, and this is Bona Sports Weekly. Thanks for listening.